for questions. We're going to introduce now Lieutenant Colonel Kenneth McDonald, who's an Associate Professor and Engineering Management Program Director at West Point, and he is in the Department of Systems Engineering. He's spent a fair amount of time in Southwest Asia and is going to talk to us a little bit about capacity development in southern Iraq. So welcome to the podium. Thank you.
Before I begin, if you would not mind, because I can tell, I was teaching on Wednesday and I could tell, just stand up for a second, because this is
Thank you.
I can do a little stretch there. And I saw the stare, that combat stare during 4 other speakers and now me. So if you'd like to remain standing, go. I've really got to thank you being the last speaker on the last day. This is fantastic. I've never done this before from that perspective, so it's going to be, I think, a real joy for me. When I look at what a privilege this is, I didn't know when I saw that the conference was going to be on critical infrastructure. As a civil engineer, professional engineer, as well as a professional planner, which I just attended the American Association, the Association of American Planners conference a few weeks ago. I saw that there's a distinct difference between the two, obviously, but also there's no communication to a certain extent, and that's kind of the theme I'm going to be talking about today. I was told I had 45 minutes, but now I realize I don't. So, with that being said, I got to get going. This is what I'll cover today. I spent 2 years in Iraq, from 2006 to 2008. I was in the British sector, down south, in the area of Basra and Maysan, and with the South District. And just to give you an idea of how much we had working in regard to projects for the South District, we had about $3 billion worth of projects while I was there. And an absolutely amazing amount of work. And I'm going to not spend a lot of time on that. What was unique about the southern sector that I was responsible for as the Deputy District Engineer, as well as I had dual-headed as the PRT engineer for the majority of the time I was down there, French reconstruction team, I worked with the British. And so I think this gave me a unique position from the standpoint of being the senior American in that area and being on their preventive reconstruction team that I was able to bring an engineer perspective. Anybody know the British and the comedy Blackadder? Our camp was called Blackadder, and you'll notice that our camp was about 100 meters from the main aiming stake for rockets coming in. So we were in a unique position to be the pinpoint location for we got 1,000 rockets in 2007 into this camp area from the militia. Okay, and this was my structure very quickly as the engineer in charge, as the deputy commander. The PRT engineer was filled at the very end just before I left, and it was basically, you say basic construct. We did everything. We did all sorts of construction. What you see here was all the way out in Albat, or Abat, which is the Al-Basra oil terminal. I got stuck out there for several days. We were doing well workovers, gas flaring, roads, and any type of construction that you could think of. So we were doing just about everything. And so for me, I had a huge amount. I had about $1 billion worth of construction going on. And from an engineering perspective, that was great. I mean, it was tremendous to be able to be in that country doing that type of work. But there was a challenge. And in this case, what you see here is we have the PRDC, which was the Provincial Reconstruction Development Council, which brought in all the infrastructure sectors from Basra. And the British, much to their wisdom, spent a lot of time on training. You see here, this was at the airport, Al Basra Airport, and all the members are here. This is actually in Dubai, where we were conducting training with the Dubai University of Dubai, to try to get them to understand basic managerial aspects of how to run a city. And then this was at the Dead Sea in Jordan, again doing sessions with them to get them to understand how do you actually run a city, because we started to see some gaps. BPWI was the Basra Public Works Initiative. Myself and a counterpart over in the British sector looked at a lot of shortcomings, lack of city engineer approach. Everybody was stovepipe with the municipalities going directly back up to Basra. I mean, from Basra to Baghdad, water, electricity, they were all stovepiped and how they were funded. Political versus technical, there was more political influence on what projects were selected. The complex funding, they couldn't actually pay for the projects because they didn't know how to appropriate the funds, and so the technicality is just getting funding out to contractors through them was very difficult. The DGs, or Director Generals, and the staff lacked any type of experience. And then the concept of operations and management after a project is done, they didn't know what that was. And then I leveraged my background as a university professor to connect with the Basra University. They have an extremely healthy engineering component to their university system. And then what I realized when I'll show you the model here in a second, we had to sell the concept to the Director Generals to make it an Iraqi program. And then we had the PRDC, we had a Dr. Hamid who was on the Director General for the water, and so we briefed him, gave him buy into it, and we actually sold this concept. So what is the Basra Public Works Initiative? Well, if we look at the model, in understanding how do you develop capacity in an organization that doesn't really have it, well, first you had to do a major asset inventory, meaning what do they have, like water? What do they actually have? And there was a lot of studies going on, but it was difficult for them to actually get on the ground and do that. We found that you could do that, but we also had to do a condition inventory of what's there, and then this piece was absolutely missing. What is the management system? How are they set up? And that's what we had never done before. They couldn't tell us. And so we went through, and once we get that to that start point, we did a sector analysis, and I put this in here because it's all political. It's all power. And if you, I explained, this is the most important block, the DG vision. Of course, that's not the case. I explained it to them that way so they would buy into it, saying, you are so important that you have your own arrow. And so, and that's not to make light, but that's understanding that it was important to them, that they had to be a part of that. Then you go to that gap analysis, and a lot of these concepts for us are easy to understand. It was exceptionally difficult. But when you do that, you do a gap analysis, you develop a strategic plan, but then what is realistic for what they have right now? What is realistic for them right now? And from that strategic plan, you develop realistic priorities, not what I call the Wizard of Oz projects. And so this becomes an iterative process, constantly going back after year, after funding cycle, after funding cycle. But what I found was that I needed some help. And so I reached back and I pulled in the department head at the time, now general trainer, to come back and work with me on this project. And he spent almost 3 months with me in Iraq in 2007. And so we did a number of things, and very quickly to get this going so we don't miss my 10-minute cutoff. A lot of good assessments. We found that there was a number of assessments, but they were totally off. The Japanese did a great job of assessing the water sector. Their recommendations were they need Prima Vera. They need, anybody know what Prima Vera is? Okay. Top-end model, I mean, it is some great project management tool. They didn't understand even how to do critical path. And so the Japanese are making this assessment, giving them the recommendation, Prima Vera, and they wanted it. They were investing in buying it, but they didn't know how to use it. They didn't understand how to develop a critical path. And so we had to go back and kind of look at things. Sector staff capacity, we started to look at training, looking at their organizational capacity development, we looked at where are they? What tells you what type of organization are they? So we did some research and came up with some good ideas. And then this was a major piece. You got what you got right now, but you've got to deal with the future. And so what I mean by that is that I understood that I had individuals that were in power. And the way I started approaching this, we're going to deal with these guys and let them stay in that, but let's look to the future. And this is the part that the Americans didn't grab onto and wasn't a lot of support. The British did, but I said we got to start putting curriculum together and start getting the Basra universities to start training the next generation of technocrats who will come in and actually understand this. Okay, so very quickly, so I got the watch over here, so I'll get them going here. We did a number of things. Training in just some basic prioritization, just project prioritization. When you talked about prioritizing objectively based on criteria, some value modeling or understanding that you've got to have some criteria before you select a project, they didn't understand that. So we spent some time on doing that with them. We did training, lots of hours of training, about 200 student hours of training. And I've got to commend the women here, because at that time in Basra in 2007, women were being executed and killed by the militia for attending school, for a number of things that we were dealing with. And these women that were part of the water sector that came in, I gave them a lot of credit. They were exceptionally bright. And this is training at the Camp Blackadder. Funny thing is that much different than cadets, they wanted more homework, because when you give them projects, cadets do not like homework, right? Okay. Well, this is the paradigm. When you look at an organization, we look at what are your baseline competencies, operating competencies, and your top-end organizations basically have these learning competencies. We were down here. They were just barely organized and functioning. IT, we leveraged IT because with IT, you have to manage with IT. And what I mean by that is that you require planning and budgeting skills, prioritization, trade-offs, and decision-making if you train them on IT. So you start training them with, because they wanted computers. So there was that desire there to have the automation. But then in that, we started to leverage and started to train them on these higher-end sort of things, if you will. So I'll cut this down and get out of here. In the educating the public sector servants, we developed the curriculum. What we wanted were the Iraqis to take control of the training. And a year after I left, they actually were doing that. They developed the curriculum and they were starting to pick up on it. And also getting Basra University involved. Some general observations, some things that when you look at, if you peel the onion back and you actually look, where are they? One, lack of education, and I use the water sector. 6% of the workforce has a bachelor or higher degree, and 43% are illiterate. The training that was happening was just word of mouth. There's a lack of enforcement and compliance mechanisms on managers and consumers to change behavior. So all these things that we were saying, this is how you got to run things, there was nothing to ensure that was going to happen. And then the political influence, the 500-pound gorilla in the room always on the sector DGs. And a side example was when we were training the water sector's middle managers on project management, that sector DG was there initially on the first day, and after about 8 hours of training, he left. He didn't want any more of it. But he was there because he thought his guys were going to get something that he was not going to be able to have. Okay, and my final point here is that when we look at if we model the learning curve of where they were to a cost constraint, we see that just a little bit of investment, you start to get huge performance occurring. So, difficult to sell, but this project was difficult to sell to the American side because of the long-term approach. The British latched onto it and actually started to do a lot of funding with it. Funding, meaning that they were giving money for SERP and other things to it. We started to see good progress, and the Iraqi people started to see, those that were involved started to see the light and actually were buying into it. And my question as I was sitting in some of the other talks is that I was seeing things occurring again. And that's where I was coming when some of the questions I was shooting out there, is that it looked like a great opportunity, but it's like I'm talking it over and over again. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Let's see, Colonel Hart? Sure. We started 15 minutes late. Do we have time for about 10 minutes of questions? Or?
We can probably do about 10 minutes.
All right. Yes, sir.